the quote is from my very, very beloved teacher, John Welwood, who died a few years ago. The mystical insight of all of the great spiritual traditions is that the surface appearance of things, while functional and useful in its own way, is not the end of the story. And then here's what I wrote for our description tonight. In our Buddhist practice, there is beautiful guidance for a personal spiritual practice that allows us to remember, touch into, and happily live into open-hearted love and compassion for ourselves and for all beings without exception. We are invited into practice with ourselves and with our own inclinations and with the obscuring conditioning of our hearts and minds. In working with these, we learn to engage more deeply with those wholesome qualities of heart and mind, and to bring these to every single aspect of our lives, even, indeed, especially, to the tender places where open hearts appear to be impossible. In this evening's offering, we will explore together some practical ways to do that. So hopefully we will do that. So it sounds good, doesn't it? It sounds good. And we're drawn to the practice. It's why we are all gathered here tonight. Because our hearts and minds, they kind of leap up at the this offering. But I want us to inquire as we inquire into the Brahma Viharas, which is the third kind of happiness, which is unconditional love, unconditional compassion for all beings, unconditional sympathetic joy, delight in others' good fortune and spiritual accomplishments without exception, and unconditional equanimity, ease, no matter what's going on. So as we invited into, as we inquire together into this practice, when I spoke a few weeks ago about August 15th, I said I was starting backwards. I was starting with, the difficult rather than the easy. And so I want to continue working with the difficult a little bit. Because I think what it does is it helps us understand the practice in a different way than how we sometimes want to play with it. So I'm going to read the description again. And what I'd like to invite you to do is to listen to it carefully and pay attention to your own experience to see if there are any words or phrases that do one of two things, that either kind of light up your heart in gladness and delight and recognition, or there might be some words or phrases that you go, oh, come on now, that's ridiculous. That's not really doable. There was a wonderful question that came up last week when Mary Louise offered remember when she offered the video, the compassion video? And it was just it was lovely. And there were, insights into people's experience. And then someone afterwards said, I was kind of preoccupied with, and I'll use the word cynicism. I don't know that they use the word cynicism, but I was kind of preoccupied with cynicism because it's like, it's just a marketing thing. It's like nobody really does that. So that's exactly what I mean. So either you will find a word that is like really touches your heart and it's like, yes, that's why I do this. Or you might find a word or a phrase that you get a little annoyed at, or discouraged about, or frustrated with, or dare I say, pissed off about. So I want to kind of look at both directions of it as we inquire together. Now, those of you in the church, I'll ask you to take one of those pieces of paper and just write down the word. And if there's anything else that occurs to you, write that down too. And then those of you on Zoom, you can do one of two things. You can either send it to me in the chat, or if you'd rather be anonymous, and for that matter, that goes with to the church as well. I've posted my phone number on the in the chat box. I hope you can also see it in the church, and you can just whip out your phone and text me. I've turned off my sound, so we're not going to get 27 dings. But if you want to, text me a word, but so write it down for yourself someplace. Remember it. If you want to text it to me, fine. That's just fine. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm going to read the description again, inviting you to contemplate it a little bit more deeply. In our Buddhist practice, there is beautiful guidance for a personal spiritual practice that allows, nourishes, guides, supports us to remember, touch into, and happily live into open-hearted love, open-hearted compassion for ourselves and for all beings without exception. We are invited into practice with ourselves and with our own inclinations, and with the obscuring conditioning of our hearts and minds. In working with these, we learn to open to and engage more deeply with those wholesome qualities of heart and mind, and to bring these to every single aspect of our lives, even, indeed, especially to the tender places where open hearts appear to be either wrong or impossible. I know some people, when we did the offering on August 15th, some people really responded to that with some of the sense of, no, it's not possible, and furthermore, it's wrong. So just see, just if you would, just write down for yourself, and if you want to send it to me, fine. But if you don't want to send it to me, that's fine too. So just write down for yourself any curiosity that you have about this. And indeed, on that piece of paper and or in your text, here's a second thing I'm going to ask you to do during the break. Would you think of a situation in your life, and it could be reading the newspaper, a situation in your life where the unconditional presence of these practices really seems wrong or just impossible, or too difficult, or where do the questions come up? When I first started this series, I asked you to help me out with teaching. And so this is really kind of a similar request. I'm asking you to help me out with teaching by contemplating for a bit, where do the Brahma Viharas, these teachings really kind of fall off the rails for us. So I'd like to be able to use that a little bit. Might even use it in just responding to some of the questions tonight, and or just as these teachings go on to help guide me. Did anybody find that hard? Hard to do? Yeah. I think that's the personal part. I'm trying to find John's. Well, that's the part of the personal practice. You know how we want, well, it's sort of like, falling in love. Our practice can be like falling in love, where we first encounter our spiritual practice, or we read some beautiful spiritual teaching and we think, okay, this is it. And our heart just lights up and we kind of resonate with it. And we go, yes, this feels absolutely right. And then, it's like, when you fall in love and this is a perfect person and everything's going to be great. And this is just unlike every relationship I've ever had before. And here we are. And then you settle into actual living with this person for the next, in my case, 50 years. It's not always so adorable and wonderful. It's like, and when we have children, it's not always so adorable and wonderful. And so inviting you here to bring your inquiry into these places where we kind of just don't even want to look, or we feel like maybe we're wrong somehow. That it really requires a fair amount of effort. And is part of the very personal, there was a word personal in my description, and the word practice came in a couple of times. I just would invite you as you go along. I got some texts. I didn't get texts from all of you, and I'm guessing that it would be your wish to kind of could we just get on with it and not, could you just talk, Sharon, and not ask me to inquire into something that's hard? And the answer to that is yes, here I go. But inquiring into something that's hard is really the antidote, if you will. We can use our spiritual practice to try to kind of paste over our spiritual practice, to kind of paste over our lives, and it becomes kind of a superficial, it's like a superficial love relationship where we never learn how to get below the surface. So the question last week and some of the questions that you've sent me are just exactly that. So getting below the surface. This is John Welwood again. He says, all psychological and all human problems are ultimately spiritual issues, symptoms of disconnection from our deeper nature. He's talking there about symptoms of disconnection from unconditional love, unconditional compassion, unconditional joy, unconditional equanimity. They're symptoms of our disconnection. We then find that every emotional issue or difficulty provides its own kind of spiritual opportunity. It shows us where we are disconnected from ourselves, and thus becomes an entry point for developing and embodying new resources that have been previously hidden. However, even under the best of circumstances, our spiritual practice is not as straightforward as we might wish or as it might seem. And one reason for this is that it introduces us to a higher order of truth that is a higher, or depending on how you think of it, deeper order of truth that goes beyond our ordinary conditioning. Somebody asked me last week at the end of the evening, what happens when we die? What happens when we die? I said, I don't exactly remember myself, which isn't entirely flippant. Some people would. I don't exactly remember myself, but Rupert Spira had what I thought was a really lovely and helpful response to that question. He said, this human life is like we live in virtual reality. Anybody ever have the experience of, putting those goggles on and having virtual reality? Anybody have that experience? Oh, you really must if you haven't already. Nobody's raising their hand. Oh my goodness. You really must, because it's very, very real. It's weird. I could only do it for a short period of time because it was so disconcerting. It's very, very real. But he says that this human life is like having goggles, virtual reality goggles on. And we take the sensations, pleasant or unpleasant, the perceptions, oh, it's this, oh, it's that perception, and the stories that we make up, the explanations, we take those and we construct a reality. And then we live within that reality. So we live, if you will, in virtual reality. So he said, when we die, nothing much happens except we take the goggles off. And we see that deeper reality more clearly. We hear that from people, many times from people who've had near-death experiences, where they go, you can't imagine the quality of love and compassion that I encountered. I will never, ever be the same. So when we die, we just take off the virtual reality goggles, and we then see that deeper reality in a way that we can't see often in our ordinary human life because of the obscurations. But the obscurations, those difficulties that we have, were we willing to inquire in those places, are doorways to a deeper understanding. Now, the problem is we tend to, when we bump into one of those doorways, we tend to start giving ourselves speeches about how we should be. Fill in the blanks. We should be this. We should be that. We should be more loving. We should be more compassionate. We should be more understanding. We should be more patient. We should be something. But the inquiry really is, what deeper reality is this inquiry, this obstacle inviting me into? And so then to notice the obstacles, to notice the places where, when we talk about August 12th, and people, and you get annoyed because people aren't being active enough, they're not being, aggressive enough, they're not responding properly, that is a wonderful, perfect doorway. When you watch the video about compassion and you find yourself being cynical because of it's just marketing, that is a wonderful doorway to what am I trying to learn here? Remembering that there are 84,000 ways to meditate, and there are 84,000 lessons to learn. So whatever it is we think we're supposed to be learning is probably not it. Or it would be it, because it would kind of take us into that deeper reality and we would see clearly. So it's really, that idea, that sense that this is a personal spiritual practice to drop into that deeper layer of happiness that is beneath our conditioning, which is really what our human life is about. Little footnote, by the way, in January 16th, Sandy Newhouse is going to come and speak. And her teacher, who died some years ago, actually went through the dying process without losing contact with that deeper reality. That he went through the whole process. It was pretty amazing. And she's going to come and tell us about it. It's January 16th. So that'll be a wonderful time, which is to say it's doable. So when we die, the filters are removed and we are resting in unbounded, unconditional love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And our spiritual practice is about learning how to touch into those. I'm going to pause there for a second. Anybody want to make a comment or a question right there? Anything come up for you as I speak to that? Let me see what time it is too. What time are we? Any questions there? Yeah.
Well, the question was, what was the last thing you just said? The last half of the sentence you trailed off, and I didn't understand.
I have no idea what.
Well, you said after we die, we rest in.
Oh, unconditional. That spaciousness that we're talking about. That spaciousness of unconditional love, kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. That the filters come off. These conditioned filters that we live in.
So then the question is, how do you know that?
How do I know it?
Yeah. How can you be so sure?
I don't. And I'm not. But those are the teachings. So maybe it's wrong. And, maybe it's wrong. I don't think it is.
Guess we get to find out, right?
Yeah. And it really is, but that question is so great because that question is like, well, why would we bother to do this spiritual practice anyway? What's the point? We're just going to die. It's the end of everything. It's just, I've heard people say, you just eat what you want, enjoy what you want. It's like, why bother? And so if we look around, we see a lot of people really have drawn that conclusion. And furthermore, we can draw that conclusion when let's take our relationships, for example. Let's take our relationships at work or our partner relationships. It's like, well, why would we bother trying to find our way through those difficult places to a place of love and care for one another that was not based on whether or not this person meets my initial ideas about what they were supposed to be. It's like, why would we bother trying to work out relationships or trying to work out marriages or trying to leave a marriage in a wholesome way when really what we would most like to do is murder somebody? So we see that question really come up in all kinds of ways in our current world, where people who don't have that kind of grounding and who are dealing with feelings of anxiety or anger actually act out in what we would consider to be, I would propose, unwholesome ways. When if they had more grounding, they might be able to navigate those emotions with more skill. So, is that a better way to be? And does it really matter ultimately? The spiritual teachings tell us yes. I don't remember.
That's one point of view. And even within Buddhism, there are many other points of view about death and dying.
Is that Pema? Is that Pema?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and talk.
Well, the Bardo practice, I don't want to get into a whole lecture, but basically, in a nutshell, a lot of the Tibetan teachers would say, while you're alive and you have a spiritual practice and you could recognize your obscurations and your habitual patterns, now is the time to change those patterns. That usually when you die, those patterns are following you like a shadow. And you do have many opportunities to change them in the Bardo, but because of our conditioning, our habitual conditioning normally, and the fear of death, normally we follow what we're familiar with, and that's our conditioned habitual patterns. And then we wind up right back on the wheel, going through the same stuff over and until we finally work through those fears and obscurations. But when I was teaching in the prison, this happens almost always when I start teaching in the prison. The prisoners would say, "Do you have omniscience?" And I go, "Yes." They go, "Really? You have omniscience?" I go, "Yes, I have complete omniscience." "And you could tell us who we were in our past lifetime?" I said, "That's really easy." "And you could tell us who we're going to be in our next lifetime?" I go, "This is simple." And all the hands go up. Of course, they think I'm going to tell them they're Cleopatra or King David or some famous person, that they're all Elvis Presley. But I say, basically, you were who you are. And unless you change right now, you're going to be the same right now as who you will be. And then, of course, all the hands go down. But this is the opportunity to change that pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful. I would propose, thank you. That's a good adjustment to what I'm describing. And I would propose that that what may happen in the Bardo after we die is that we see that more clearly. Maybe, depending on how unconscious we are. There are indeed some people who will go through that whole process completely unconsciously and then just plop right back into the same pattern. So thank you. Yeah. Other comments? Any other questions? So remember, the purpose of life is to be happy. The purpose of life is to learn how to be happy. That's what we're doing here. Just what Pema is saying. What we're doing here is we're learning how to let go of those behaviors, those attitudes, those mental obscurations, those physical actions that obscure our happiness. I'm reminded of Naomi Shihab Nai's poem she says, "Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things." And so take a minute and just whatever about this is interesting to you. Maybe it's the question you asked originally, or maybe it's something that has come up. In order to live this wholesome life, a life of kindness, a life of loving goodness, a life of compassion, a life of joy, a life of happiness, a life of equanimity, what do we need to lose? And again, just write it down. If you want to text it to me, you want to put it in the chat, whatever. You want to write it on your piece of paper and Mary Louise will get them to me. What do we need to lose? I'm going to go on and then ask you to keep writing as we go. On August 15th, we led with hatred never ceases by hatred. Hatred or resistance in its many forms never ceases by hatred or resistance in its many forms. By love alone is hatred healed. This is an ancient and eternal law. I looked up some synonyms for hatred: animosity, antagonism, antipathy, bitterness, contempt, disgust, enmity, grudge, hostility, ill will, loathing, rancor, resistance, revulsion. So if we are caught in those places, the teachings invite us to remember we will not find deep happiness. We will not find deep happiness. And a more accurate, but linguistically slightly more clumsy translation of that statement is hatred never ceases by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred healed. This is an ancient and eternal law. So when we encounter difficulties, what might be synonyms for non-hatred? See if you can come up with 3. What might be synonyms for non-hate? Hatred never ceases by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred healed. What do you come up with? Maybe put some in the chat if you're online. So a couple of things that people said we need to lose are glasses, whichever ones we wear, having to be right. Oops, wait a minute. Seeing ourselves as a victim. Seeing hatred as reality. Losing a sense of needing to control things to avoid pain. Maybe non-hatred, synonyms of non-hatred: love, kindness, compassion, understanding, acceptance, awareness, allowing what is. Lose our striving to win and look good. So the aim of our practice, the aim of our practice, our practice, our practice is to prime the pump, if you will, to cultivate, to let go of unwholesome states as they arise, when they arise, which of course they do, and to find ways to cultivate more wholesome states. Laughter, empathy, inclusion. I'm reading some of the things you've sent to me. What else? Understanding, acceptance. But that sort of begs the question, doesn't it? Because it's like, okay, fine. How do you do that in this situation? Which is the inquiry that is hard, that we often don't want to engage in. You know, when people are warring, when families are in conflict, when we often just want to avoid that pain and not inquire, how can I bring my practice to this? So for starters, the invitation really is to see the difficulties clearly with that quality, those qualities of understanding, just the qualities that you've written down. To see the difficulties and to allow yourself to notice them, to notice the obstacles with those qualities of heart and mind toward yourself and toward the obscurations themselves. So when you say, how do I be with the climate crisis? And you feel whatever that experience is, how do I be with a situation in the family? And you allow yourself with kindness and compassion to experience that obstacle. When you go, I don't know, and furthermore, I don't want to. When you experience, someone who is racist or homophobic and behaving incredibly badly or speaking incredibly badly, and you have an experience of that. We start by bringing these qualities to our own experience. Take a moment right now and see, whatever that difficulty is there a little thread someplace where you experience, I will say, hatred or resistance? I don't want to be with this. Or I don't want to be with that other being if they're going to be like this. Is there any way that you experience hatred or resistance to which you could bring a quality of whatever it was, one of those 3 words that you wrote down, in your own experience, not out there, but in your own experience? Any, I know we're almost out of time. Any comments or questions about that? Anybody want to raise a question? Peter? Yeah.
That was great. I was thinking it'd be nice to compile all this. It'd be nice to have a book and review what people have written. As it occurs to me that doing metta for the difficult person seems to fit with that. I find it challenging, and I guess that's a kind of a door to, or it kind of seems compatible anyway.
Yeah. I will indeed try to take these and bring them into future talks. I would propose that in many of these situations, the difficult person is myself. So we kind of want to move to offering the metta practice for that person out there when we haven't yet offered kindness to me caught in this obscuration. So the invitation actually might be to not get ahead of ourselves by trying to be good or be right, but to really be unconditionally present with how I am in this situation. And in this case, whatever the cases may be, some of you have written down those examples. In these cases, sometimes to start with, I am the difficult person because I don't, I can't be with this. I won't be with this. I won't bring any quality of kindness. And so my own heart has gotten hard. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I'm the difficult person at times. Anything else? Anything from the church? Time online. Anybody? One more comment?
Yep, we have one more comment.
First of all, I want to thank you for bringing this up, because most people don't like to talk about what you're talking about for obvious reasons. And this is the crux of it all, which is why the very first talk that the Buddha gave were the Four Noble Truths talking about suffering, which is what we're talking about.
That's right. This is dukkha.
And so the word, if I could put this entire summation of what's coming up for me about all this, the word is courage. Courage, to have the courage to look at the things that are not pretty, sexy, and glamorous in ourselves, and to bring compassion to that, and that's what you're talking about. And thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And for you, the word is courage. For other people, it might be, I mean, for Peter, it was metta, it was bringing some kindness to myself when I'm in this difficult place. For somebody else, it might be a different word. So I invite you to take a word with you and to allow yourself to do just that, what Pema is describing, of just being willing to look a little more deeply into your practice, to see where it hits a road bump, a speed bump, and to see what it's calling you to bring. And we'll continue, as I continue these, we'll get your feedback, and you feel free to, you've got my phone number, you've got my email. If you want to write something to me, we'll try to incorporate those into future talks, which is hugely helpful to me to know where you are. And isn't that what we're doing, huh? We're kind of looking to see, where are we and how can we soften those edges in a way that leads us in a more wholesome direction. So we're doing it as a community. Where are we? Where are the stuck places? So that we can together inquire with kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity. Of course, there is dukkha, and of course, we have to work with these things. So thank you for your help. Thank you for your lovely, wonderful faces on my Zoom screen. Thank you for being in the church, and I hope to see you again there before too long. So blessings, everybody.